Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for staying with us on Talking Point to Vote. The new licensing rule has stirred up a storm of controversy. One point of contention, how the news was communicated. What started as a press release on Tuesday was followed by several clarifications from the authorities, and finally a meeting with reporters this morning by Information Minister Yaacob Ibrahim. We're going to take your views and opinions in just a moment, but I do want to remind you, don't call and vote. Vote online at channelnewsasia.com/TP. That's where you go to vote. Call us with your views at 669-10028 and tweet us at TPVote. Alrighty, that's the way to do it, everybody. Let's go to the poll right now and where it's standing. Will the new licensing rule limit online news content? That's the question we've been asking you online. And yes, it holds the majority for now. 57.3% are saying yes. 42.7% are saying no. We're getting a lot of votes, so keep voting and keep those points coming through. Minister, I understand that you had a little bit of an... you want to add on?
Just a quick response, I think, to the question about parliamentary debates. I think in terms of governance, the law has been passed. So that's where the debate has taken place. Regulations are being passed on a regular basis, I think, on a range of issues. I think when there's a major shift and a change in law, I think that's where we go back to Parliament and we debate that. So as I mentioned earlier, where the Broadcasting Act, where we're looking at perhaps effecting some changes next year, that's where a full-scale debate will take place. But in this instance, I think members of Parliament are free to raise the issues to be debated in Parliament as well.
Do you want to say you had a quick response to that?
Yeah, basically I don't understand this business about parliamentary debate. Essentially what has been done is it's been done without any kind of consultation even prior to that. We don't need to convene Parliament to discuss this. You could just talk to some of us. And that wasn't even done. So the other thing is, I think the Minister has said a great deal about freedom of speech and how there's no constraints, say what you like, and all that. I mean, that's all well and good. The fact is, the definition of news sites has been framed so broadly that a lot of things could come under it. And the government's position is not clear. You say 10 sites only, okay, that's the beginning. 2 days, 3 days later, you say bloggers are exempted. And then after that, what comes next? So basically, there's no clarity. We're living in this uncertain area.
That's causing a lot of anxiety, maybe, for online citizens. Are you getting that feeling from fellow online bloggers and news sites, maybe?
Yes,
You're hearing
it is.
that?
I think what matters here is trust. Yeah, people don't think that the government will stick to just 10 sites.
I think, if I may just add on to what Bertha has said, it's the way the legislation is drafted is so broad. I mean, it says something like any report on social, economic, political, cultural, artistic, etc., on any other aspect of Singapore. Was there a need for this kind of blunderbuss legislation, or could it have been drafted more precisely?
Well, as I mentioned, the wordings of the regulations, these are in existence today. We didn't add on to it in a specific way. So, like I said, essentially what it does is to bring on to effect the regulations to the online versions. But what is probably, like I said, most of concern to people is actually content. Are we able to, what governs the content? What can be said? Even if you're brought online as a news site, are you able to report as you did before? Are you able to report critical pieces? That remains applicable. In fact, if you look at the way it's unfolded, I mean, we have also shared that from 96 to now, we have actually used it very lightly. Comments that are political, comments that are critical remains untouched, and that should be so. But comments which we feel are unsuitable, for example, where it's racially, from a religious perspective, inflammatory, or with hate speech involved, and we have seen some of these examples. I think that's where MDA would probably step in. But I think in most cases, criticisms, comments, views from Singaporeans,
but they already have the power to step in, and which they have done.
Yes.
So
there are existing rules in place, the Broadcasting Act and whatnot.
So why was the need to
start
licensing the cyberspace? You said parity. It could be achieved the other way around too. Yeah, for the news sites instead of licensing the cyberspace news sites.
Citizens have brought up examples. You can publish clarifications, you can publish retractions, do things like that.
In fact, I want to take up what the Minister said earlier. He says that we can look at how to manage this in other ways. See, that is the point of consultation. If you came and talked to some people, then maybe we could come up with some other ways. Your concern must be responsible reporting, I suppose, right? Responsible freedom of expression. That could be done in other ways. The trouble is when you start saying that you should be on a par with mainstream media, people think of on a par as what Professor Arun said, not bottled up.
In a different context, your response?
No, I would say it's actually quite different. I think online media is actually very different from print media. All we're asking is that if you're reporting on news, there's a certain level of responsibility. Actually, what the regulations bring on board really is the licensing, and I think the ability to communicate to the companies to take down news, say within 24 hours, which previously we didn't have, and which is something I think of particular concern for online news. But the rest of it, where it's governed by it in terms of the space for what content you can carry, I think, as we mentioned earlier, many of us agree that some of these things actually should not be, perhaps not be acceptable. But the rest of the space, which is where people are concerned with, their views, criticisms, alternative views, I think that remains valid.
Why not rely on the existing frameworks like the NPPA or the Broadcasting Act?
No, so the difference is that I think what we bring to bear is for those sites that are reporting news, we have already mainstream print media being regulated, but a large part of actually news is being generated online, even by some of the same companies. But the rules have not been updated, so essentially that's what's happening.
Okay.
But the rest of the space,
would you consider the other way around? In terms of deregulating the mainstream media, which has shown tremendous responsibility over the last half a century.
Let's talk about
So
the
why
idea of
haven't
ethical
they-
responsibility in a moment.
Yes.
I just want to take a quick phone call before we continue. 66910028. Our next caller is standing by. Hi, what's your name?
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Madi.
Hi, Madi. What is your question today?
Well, actually, I don't understand why is that there should be a regulation, a restriction there, especially, we Singaporeans, generally, we know where we stand, really, you know what I mean. So, on another aspect of it, I think it would be more provocative if there's this kind of regulations and all. Alright? Because as a blogger, sometimes when I see this kind of notices and all this kind, sometimes I don't even feel like reading it. So, especially the racial, I think our minister here, Mr. Tan, is more concerned on the racial aspect, and religious aspect of it, if I'm not mistaken. On that aspect, nobody would, some might there, but not many, alright? Just for the few of these people, we just can't restrict on this.
Right. So you're saying that the reader, him or herself, can take that position. Madi, thank you so much for
Yes.
raising your view with us. Roy joins us right now at 66910028. Roy, hello.
Hello.
Hi, you're on the air. Your question or comment, go ahead.
Yes, I just would like to ask why the need to so-called update these licensing issues, this news licensing, when we already have existing laws such as Sedition Act or Maintenance of Harmony Act to deal with this kind of racial insight that might happen.
We have other legislation in place already. Roy, thank you very much, Minister.
Yeah.
Well, as mentioned earlier, I think this is regarding to news sites.
Reiteration.
Has changed. News sites, in terms of print media, has been regulated, but a lot of it has moved online as well. I think that's how we see it. But I want to reiterate again, the rest of the sites, the rest of the comments, how people articulate their views, I think that remains open. That hasn't changed.
I think what people need is basically something more explicit than a general approach, which leaves open to further changes down the line. So basically, if you are saying that readers' comments are not touched, bloggers are not touched, and all that, then it should be written into the regulations as well.
We know that there was a posting on the Facebook page, but part of the problem for the MTA,
Posting on
yes,
the
but part of the
Facebook
problem
page.
is it's not ensconced in the actual wording of the regulations.
Because
per se.
actually, in terms of the regulations, in terms of content,
Right.
we have spelled out what are those areas which are deemed not so acceptable. But it doesn't cover the political commentaries, it doesn't cover individual perspectives, and that remains a very wide space.
I
And that
disagree
space
with
is
that.
not
I disagree with
Why?
that because the objectionable content also relates to matters that is said to disturb national harmony, public order, and
So how do
basically
we draw the line?
who defines all that? So
the
basically that is the
interpretation
problem.
is left primarily
Right.
to
the regulators.
regulators, and I think that is a legitimate concern.
It's a legitimate concern, but I think it's also useful to look at how it has been translated into reality. So we see how MDA has approached. They have the proliferation of sites today. Many comments, many are very critical. I mean, for example, with this ongoing regulations debate, many are very critical about it, but those remain valid and they are not subjected to takedown.
Marty brought up the fact that as the reader, I can discern for myself sometimes.
Yes, you do.
Look at the Amy Cheong incident where she had left certain comments and netizens responded to that. Sometimes it can be that sense of self-policing.
That's what they
There will
call
be that.
community
That's right.
moderation. You know, there are enough intelligent and responsible people in the cyberspace.
And there will
You
be
know,
that.
it has been demonized, unfortunately, a little too much, I think, that it gives the impression that the Wild Wild West cyberspace is the only cyberspace that we have.
No, in fact, I
but
think
we have a very
indeed,
responsible people.
I think the community responds, and we have seen them
Yes.
responding. But what it allows is for the authorities to also manage that in terms of asking them to take down, because in some cases it can be inflammatory. There'll be those that react. In fact, I would say majority react responsibly, but there'll also be those that may react in a different way, and sometimes it sparks off a dynamic
Sure.
of its own. So I think the society, I think the recognition is community is responsible. A lot of them are pushing back, but I think it also allows authorities to at least deal with those issues when they crop up
Yeah,
as
but
well.
those who react irresponsibly are not those lists of 10. So basically, so the question is, when are you going to extend that list of 10, which is actually very mainstream, to those whom you deem are not acting responsibly?
So-
And the other question is this: when you talk about other ways and all that, and I'm glad the caller talked about how netizens, some of them are, most of them or us are intelligent enough to suss out for ourselves what's right and what's wrong, and I think some form of self-policing could be left to ourselves to do. For example, if you want parity in mainstream media, I wouldn't object to Breakfast Network giving anybody the right of reply. That would be one. That would definitely ensure responsible reporting because you have to take comments.
Would other bloggers feel the same way? I wonder.
I can't speak for
Yeah.
that.
No,
I
in
can't
fact,
speak for that. Yeah.
IPS, we did research on this subject. Surprisingly to many people, that each of the major sites has its own code of practice, code of conduct, code of engagement. So, that's why the other idea of having a universal code of conduct never found any traction with this community, because each one feels that they want to and they can act responsibly. I wonder whether the government should really move away from a nanny state mode to a new position where it trusts the citizenry.
Yeah.
It gives them the chance to do it right. When they don't do it right, you can move in, and in the Singapore context, you can move in very swiftly and very decisively. You have enough reserve powers with so many other pieces of legislation, so people are wondering, why this?
Let's get your quick response to before we go for a break.
In fact, I think the space remains open. I fully recognize that there are responsible players online as well, but I think many people in society are also concerned. You have cyberbullying, you have people posting hate postings, and for example, or targeting individuals, putting out the details online. There's a whole range of behaviors. At the end of it, I think we also need to discuss, and this is not the subject of this particular regulation, but that's something that eventually we need to discuss.
But
as
does a
society.
regulation like this hint that we are a nanny state, do you think?
No, I think what it identifies is really with regards to news sites who are reporting. And I think we feel, and that's where perhaps we might disagree, that there ought to be a certain level of responsibility when it comes to reporting news.
Where do you lie on this? Obviously, everybody wants to read responsibly and read responsible materials. Do you think that this regulation will help you do that? Or do you think it might hint at a nanny state that has been brought up? Keep calling us, and we'll also be talking to prominent blogger Ravi Philemon when Talking Point returns after a short break. Stay with us.